the time is now to be intentional with things like culture. And part of that is, let's take a critical look at our leadership culture in fire and in the wildland fire community, and be honest with ourselves about, is it serving us as well as it can? And if not, what does a new recipe look like from wherever you're at within your sphere of influence?
This is the Wildfire Lessons Podcast, where we promote learning by revealing the complexity and risk in the wildland fire service. We share the lessons. The learning that follows is up to you. Hello, everyone. Travis Dotson here, and today we're going to be talking about leadership, and specifically fire crew leadership. And we're going to be hearing from somebody who's out there doing it, running a crew right now. And they're coming to us with some success stories, right? They've had some success implementing some real specific approaches to leading a fire crew and dealing with all the different things that our workforce is dealing with right now. And they're coming to us with something they want to share, right? An approach, something that you all can try. And we really like when folks come to us with lessons based on success. You know, so much of what we deal with at the Lessons Learned Center is accidents and injuries and fatalities. And obviously there's lots of lessons from those types of events and lots of learning that can be done. But it's not the only way to learn, right? We can learn from success as well. And so, yeah, we're really excited about that approach in general and this instance specifically. So yeah, let's jump in. All right. Welcome to the Wildfire Lessons Podcast. And today we're really excited to bring you a new voice. And we'll why don't we just jump into it? And Ben, tell us who you are.
Well, thanks, Travis. Yeah, it's funny you say new voice, but it depends on who's listening. Because if any of my crew members end up listening to this, they'll be like, I've heard this all before, once a whole bunch of times. But I am really excited to be able to share this more broadly. So my name is Ben McLane. I'm a hand crew captain on the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, and I've been in federal fire for going on 10 years now. Got my start with the Oregon Department of Forestry for a season, and then worked my way over to Central Oregon. And after an enlightening fill-in experience with the Prineville Hotshots and getting to do some of that hotshot stuff with them, I knew what I was here to do. So I made my way down to Northern California, and I was a senior on a hotshot crew in Northern California for about 4 years before I came up to the Pacific Northwest, and took on a little module that turned into a 13-person hand crew over a few years here on the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, which is where I'm at now, and have been thoroughly enjoying and learning throughout the entire time.
Nice. That's funny. I always say, like, when we're going to do introductions, you know, I go back and forth of like, hey, give me your standard S-class intro. You know what I mean? Because we have a formula about how we introduce ourselves, right? And it's I always joke about like it kind of shows what we value, right? By what our standard introduction is. Like, it's almost like credentials, right? Like, here's why I matter, or what. I mean, of course we could over intellectualize it, but
in building the credibility.
Sure.
And I mean, even in that introduction, right? I'm thinking about, okay, there's people listening to this. I have something valuable to share that has benefited me in the time that we're all experiencing together, and the fire environment that we're all experiencing together, and more broadly even. But I don't want people to tune me out, you know? And so, and I took M410, right? And they tell you got to establish some credibility.
Yeah.
So how do we quantify and describe competency in a short period of time? You're absolutely right. We have a formula. And, but that's really what I'm here to talk about is that we've missed the forest for the trees a little bit with our formula and with how we assess competency. And what we thought were causes were actually outcomes, were symptoms of a deeper rooted where the competency really did can't come from. And those sources of competency still absolutely exist. But the world has changed since the last time we really took a critical look at, and I think we took some things for granted that aren't at play anymore. So we're losing the competency and we're not seeing the same symptoms or the same outcomes of competency like we're used to, or competency isn't coming in the same packages that we're used to. But it's still there. We just got to reframe how we're looking for it a little bit. So changing the formula of how we introduce each other. That's absolutely. But maybe I'm the guy who's been thinking about it for years and wrote a paper about it, and I'm still in the same pattern. This takes time. This is consistent effort stuff, folks. And maybe it's less that maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the structure of the introduction doesn't matter that much. Maybe it's we reframe what we're looking for, what we're listening for in that introduction. And what we should be listening for is, what does this person hold as highly valuable? So for me, I really value my experience, and I really value what I learned while on a hotshot crew in some pretty gnarly fire situations and fire seasons. And I also really value the privilege I have to have gotten to build a hand crew essentially from scratch. We were one of the last squad modules in the nation. And that's why I was able to go from a senior firefighter job to being a supervisor of a module myself. And in building that, and given the experience I had in some precedent setting fire years, and I could rattle on about other things. We'll get into it but I value what I've learned over the years. And so people who hear that can go, okay, this guy values learning. And that will help people be good teammates to me. And
how is it, like, how did we get to here? Because and of course, from the Lessons Learned Center perspective,
right,
that is valuable to me, because here you are, this person out there doing fire stuff, learning stuff, innovating, right? And we don't know that at the Lessons Learned Center until, you reach out to us, which is like the greatest thing, right? It's somebody out there is engaged, a student of fire reaches out and says, hey, here's this thing that I've been thinking about, which we get that every so often. But not only did you say, here's this thing I've been thinking about and working on, here it is in a very coherently, you know what I mean? Like, here it's written up. I have put time into this. And for some reason you came to this venue, right? Partly because that's our job. But yeah, tell us a little bit about that, how we ended up here and why you reached out to the Lessons Learned Center.
Yeah, man. So I had, back to the student of fire thing. I have such reverence for the privilege I have of having come up in a culture of fire that took operational safety so seriously. And that is deeply intertwined with the Wildfire Lessons Learned Center and that post South Canyon, but even up through South Canyon into, and then eventually with the big lie in 2016 from Mark Smith and all the L classes, MCS, right? Mission Centered Solutions. I'm the product of that, and it has been a gift to me and my peers. And so I've always had this reverence and respect for this ecosystem of learning from unintended outcomes.
That is what placed me in the Northern Rockies Tactics Seminar and how we got to know each other. And so you were talking about all of the good things that Lessons Learned Center does, and this desire was in the room to learn from things that weren't just to do with unintended outcomes. And we don't have to wait for something to go wrong to learn from it and be students of fire. And so broadcasting out more of that. Here's how we live our values of duty, respect, and integrity from this Learning Lessons Center perspective and mindset and approach really inspired me. And at the same point in time, I had already been putting some pen to paper, trying to articulate what the culture of our crew was like. And because every time I brought it up, I had seen the successes. and in describing it to some other folks, it's challenging. It's a challenging topic to discuss because it is squishy and it is a little bit different for everybody. And so what I found and what I've been able to uncover, throughout the attempt to be able to share what we've developed on our own crew. I learned a lot just in that process as well about what it is and what it isn't. And in hopes, with sharing it through the Lessons Learned Center, folks can see a little bit of themselves in it, but also more than anything, just be inspired to try and approach the concept of culture and of values with some intention, to be actors and be agents who influence those things, as opposed to sort of helpless recipients of them.
For sure.
And that's really, I think, what has been lost over and what we've taken for granted post the big lie. And I think from that, or at least some of the outcomes and symptoms we're seeing play out in our workforce and in the fire environment that upset us the most because they're the hardest to explain. I think it might have something to do with us taking for granted the importance of being intentional with values and culture.
Yeah. You want to build it, right? Rather than, like you said, it's kind of like, when people say, oh, there's there's two things that firefighters hate. It's, the way things are and change, or,
Yeah.
the problem with overtime is is either not enough or too much. Like those are the only two things, right? And it's the same thing with culture. We like to complain about it and laud it, right? Like hold it up on this pedestal at the same time.
Right.
I like that idea of saying, hey, let's make it what we want. And there is the part of getting there is recognizing it, is complaining about it, is saying, look, here's some things that we don't like, or at least these outcomes that we don't like, right?
Certainly.
And some of that stuff is stuff that wasn't always talked about as much, or it was taken as inevitable, right? The divorce rate or the level of addiction, substance abuse, those kinds of things. That's just part and parcel of this lifestyle or whatever. And I think that's where we can look at that differently, right? And that's some of the things that you start to dive into. So if you wouldn't mind, you want to try summarizing the article that you wrote and sent to us?
I'd love to. I will try. What I will do is I will describe what it means to me. But I want to caveat that with is, like the big lie, I want this to generate discussion. I want it to be a little provocative. Because either way, folks, whether they love it or hate it, they're thinking about it, and they're thinking about, like you said, and being aware that this is a factor that is playing a role. These values, these things like values and things like culture. And I loved the culture of fire. It was absolutely for me. I still do. It's this mindset of, we're thermostats, not thermometers, right? We set the temperature. Yeah. We tell fire what it's doing.
Sure.
We're victors, not victims. We embrace discomfort. And whether we want to complain about it or not, the hill is just as steep. and so what you have influence over is how much it sucks, not what the reality of the situation it is. And I loved that, right? And it has made me the best version of myself. And it's shown me I'm capable of things which I never could have dreamed I would be. And that part of our culture that all of us draw from so much. And it has such huge potential to make us better people throughout society. But one of the things I've learned over time is that it's not so much our weaknesses that cause our problems. It's us overutilizing our strengths. And we have a unique ability as a cohort of people to embrace and navigate in uncertain and uncomfortable environments. And that's great when it's playing its proper role and it's contributing to society in the meaningful way that it does when we go to work. But in order to do that, we have to compartmentalize some things. And eventually the storeroom of where you compartmentalize stuff fills up and it overflows. And then we can't control where those boxes are falling down. So that's what I was observing in my time as I was coming off the, hotshot crew. We had been through some, it was 2017 through 2020 timeframe in Northern California. I mean, I had been in close proximity to fatalities. I had seen paradise burn down around me. There was all this stuff. And I wasn't afraid of the physical environment, and that culture of operational safety that we had developed was the reason for that, right? I feel like I could, and I did say something at times, and people noticed. But this job affected us outside the fire line too. And I was seeing the symptoms of that, and they were getting worse, and fire seasons were getting worse. And that's what scared me, right? And I started to see some of those symptoms come up in my own life, and that really scared me. And so I wrote this piece for the Mystery Ranch Backbone series, and I think Fire Management Today also picked it up because psychological safety was a fun word to say, and people were really focused in on it, and for the right reasons, right? Because it was our psychology and the breakdown of our psychological environment that was tearing us up more than anything, right? It wasn't the fire environment. We could hike the hills, we were tough, and none of that had changed. It was, I saw some of the strongest people, the people I looked up to the most in the world, get broken by this job and have their lives fall apart. And I was terrified that that was going to happen to me. And I wasn't finding a good answer for how to prevent it from happening in the L courses. and so at the same point in time, right, I'm a product of this see something, say something culture. So I didn't have an answer, right? I didn't have a path, but I still felt like I was empowered to say something. I sort of was like, all right, I'm going to challenge us. I'm going to do a call to action to say I'm identifying the issue and there's not a clear solution to how to fix it, but that's no reason to ignore it. And so that was that. But then I go to now I take on a leadership position, and my career starts to progress, and I have this whole new responsibility of leadership on me. And so, folks who are reading this essay, there's kind of two things going on, right? There's the unavoidable outcomes of this job and the necessary compartmentalization that takes place in it, and that manifests in things off the fire line. And then there's also what I was learning as a new and young module leader, I still am, right? But, we don't have a bunch of 6'2", 220-pound woods familiar people walking through the door. And the fire environment is getting worse, and there's no compromise to the standard. And I've got to go out and find people, and our numbers are going down. And I need to learn how to do this. And it was super intimidating, and I was afraid. But one of the things that this job has taught me, I was intimidated the first time I got invited to fill in with a hotshot crew, and so I said yes. I was intimidated by the length of seasons in working in Northern California, but I said yes. I started to develop an identity in how I overcame fear was saying yes to things that challenged me, as long as they served, as long as they built up in the name of service to my community. And I found that my fear went away when I was in the situation, right? Fear has no place in the present. And so through understanding, intimidation goes away. And so I decided to dive in and learn everything I could about leadership, both what the fire service was offering me, but also what was on the podcasts. We live in an amazing time, right? I can listen to a podcast from Jocko Willink and Brene Brown and everybody else, and I can read books and learn a ton, get a graduate level education in team leadership without having to go to school, just in my free time. And that's another challenge of the fire environment that we were in, and that we're still in, is we're losing a lot. I didn't get the mentorship, right, that decades of the fire service had. And many folks don't. That's just the truth of it, right? We're losing talent. People are retiring, people are leaving, and the fire environment isn't letting up at all. And if it sounds like I'm going in a million directions, good, because what the big lie did and what I loved about it was it talked about the elephant in the room. And now it feels like we're fighting fire in a herd of elephants. but because of who we are, we're going to show up and keep fighting fire in that herd of elephants. But we better be able to point them out to each other, and we better be able to talk about it. And at the very least, I knew that much, right? See something, say something. Let's talk about the elephants. Let's bring them out into the open. And maybe when we do that, we'll lose some fear and intimidation, and we'll be able to successfully navigate this complex and uncertain environment more successfully. And so over time, I was hearing these consistencies and all this sort of leadership training I was delving into, and culture was one of them, right? You got to be intentional with culture. And ensuring psychological safety, meaning building high trust relationships amongst your crew, amongst your team, was another one. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, I don't really know, but I'm going to start, and I'm going to be intentional, and I want to, right? And so I started, first things first, investing in trust. And so trust is built in drops and lost in buckets. And so I knew that. So invest in those relationships with people, and get to know people. Well, as I got to know people, I started to question these sort of old school and ways of how we assess competency in people. Because I also, as we do the job for longer, pretty quick, most people realize that it has a lot less to do with the shape of the package or what the package looks like, and a lot more to do with what's inside, right? It's what's in between your ears. It's what's in your character. It's hard to pick out from a lineup who's going to be a great wildland firefighter, especially in that type 1 level community, and who's not. And there's a lot of, that's another consistency in sort of high discomfort work environments. And so there has to be something more, right? There has to be something under the surface. I started to see some of the fruit of me behaving as if I believed that the people that I had on my crew, because they had said yes, right? Because they thought about, they pictured themselves being a wildland firefighter, and whatever their understanding of that was, right? They said yes, they wanted to do it, and their reasons why they wanted to do it. Nobody was talking about the money, because up until very recently, it was to be a federal wildland firefighter, you were doing it for the least money. No, they were talking about a call to adventure. They were talking about the desire to serve. And I kept every year, right? I'm putting on these trainings, and I'm revisiting what duty, respect, and integrity, means. And then it hit me how fast we just breeze over these things. Oh yeah, duty, respect, and integrity, it's important. They're the pillars, and then we move on and we start teaching people skills, because they're not showing up with the same skills that we sort of took for granted they always had. Because there's not a bunch of people in the woods that grow up in the woods and know a wildland firefighter and know what it takes. But for the same reason that's not the case anymore, it's also the same reason why it doesn't have to be. So the reason that our demographics across our nation have changed is because we're more interconnected as a society with technology. But that also means that we have access to go find people who have the right values and who live them with their consistent behavior to be great wildland firefighters. Our hang-up is how we assess competency is rooted in, as a culture, is rooted in the outcomes of those values that we got really accustomed to. And we took for granted that people were walking in the door with like values to us and knowing what values were and how to use them. And so, this piece is sort of just trying to, and I articulate and describe a little bit, okay, so here's some examples of what that looks like in my world. But it's important to understand, and I do love a good analogy. And so this is where hopefully the podcast can complement the paper. But again, the goal is just think about it and ask yourself the question, and ask your crew the question, what are my values? And not just the values that I say that sound good when we're in the briefing and we're talking about this stuff. No, what is the fruit in your life? What is your consistent behavior like? Because that is what shows you what you value, what is valuable to you. And if that doesn't line up with what you're talking and what you want your values to be, well, then you need to make a change in your own life. And that's another thing, in this leadership journey, right? Is humble accountability. If I was going to ask people to enter into the fire line and I was going to be responsible for their safety, and it really did weigh heavily on me, I needed to own that. And again, I'm reading Jocko Willink, right? So I'm become the extreme ownership guy. So I got my own house in order first, and before I started asking other people to do so. Before I get into the details, I just want to hit the big concepts of how I picture culture and how I picture values. And I think it's helpful. Culture is the social environment within which we operate, right? So that can still sound a little squishy. Okay, what about the physical environment when you show up to work? It's a building, right? It's a building. It's got doors. It keeps the weather out. You can set a thermostat for the temperature. But we often take for granted that somebody had to build that. Otherwise, if there was no building here, we would just be standing out. Right now, I'm in the Pacific Northwest and it is raining outside and it is miserable. But thankfully I'm not. I actually work on one of those forests where back in 1906, somebody showed up and had to build their own house. The forest supervisor had to build their own house and go out into the community and hire district rangers. So we take for granted. Okay, so what is the social environment like? Are you building a house? Are you building expectations through what you coach and what you model with your own behavior, and what you tolerate is what you coach, right? So are you being explicit with the expectations about what the social environment of your work environment is as a leader? That's your job. It is my job. If the roof starts leaking, I might not be able to fix it myself, but I have to notify somebody whose job it is to fix it, right? But it is my job to ensure that my crew has what they need to be successful. And so if the building is a disaster, I need to pursue with effort getting that fixed. And we know sometimes it takes effort. You can't just snap your fingers and fix it. Mm-hmm. You got to have a lot of conversations, and you got to pursue, and every analogy falls apart when you get too into it. And I won't get into the state of the agency as a whole right now, because I do think that we're on the cusp of some really beneficial change. But in the social environment, I don't have to go and ask permission or ask for a contracting officer to hire somebody to fix it. Thankfully, I get to set the tone there. So that's culture, right? It's the social environment, and you need to build the house. And so if you haven't done that yet, start asking yourselves the questions of what is the structure of our culture, and what do I intend it to be? And how can I ensure that anybody who walks through that door is safe here, so that they can become the best versions of themselves?
Well, and I feel like that. I mean, you've said it a couple different times in ways about living it, right? And that's, getting your own house in order, which I feel like follows a fairly often reported and experienced arc of parenting, right? Which I can speak to. And it's this terrifying moment when you realize, oh man, nothing I say matters.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter nearly as much, at least, as what I do. And it's terrifying because your child is going to emulate how you are. Not what you say, right? When we we know the saying, but realizing it and then and being invested so much like you are in a parenting role or in a leadership role, right, is going, oh wait, if I want them to act this way, I have to be that way. And some of the things you're talking about, right, those real like gritty things, it's like, oh man, I have to live it. That's a tough thing, and if you're not willing to do it, you're not going to get the results.
Yeah, well, that's what you're getting paid for, right? The duty of is to live those values that you're asking of others. And so having that accountability, but doing it from a place of authenticity, because that's where, you know, we have this more visibility, we have this increased visibility as part of this interconnected world that we live in. The only way to successfully live those values is to do it from a place of admittance that you're not perfect, and that's okay. Because guess what? You don't expect your people to be perfect either, and and you're gonna get. And so this is about, really, as squishy as this topic can feel, this is about performance optimization in order to meet the needs of the fire environment, and deliver the product that the public deserves, and to be the firefighters that we deserve to that we deserve to have at our left and right for each other. We've got to show up as the best versions of ourselves, and that starts at home, on the home district, with the module leaders training their people. And we skip the part that primes the environment for successful execution of the skills we teach, in order to get to the teaching of the skills, because we feel rushed, like we got to get that done first so we can go available and get out on assignment. But you're never going to get optimal performance if you're skipping the foundation and the environmental priming to make optimal performance possible. And it's our duty to pursue earnestly optimal performance and set a very high aim. And so culture is the house that we build. And within the house, now that so here's what we want our culture. Here's what we want it to feel like when you're on our crew. And we go through, we utilize, again, we're not inventing anything from scratch. That's not our job. Our job is to invent where fire lines go. It's not to invent how to construct a successful culture. So we utilized a group called Leader Factor, read some of their books, and they have this mindset. They make it very simple of making sure people are safe at sort of 4 different levels of their experience on your team. So you've got inclusion, right? That first brand new person walking in the door, first steps first, make them feel like you're glad they're here exactly as they are right now. Step 2 is learner safety. Make sure that they're safe to learn, which means there's no stupid questions, right? So if someone asks a question, you reward it. You reward it with vulnerability. Hey, thank you. Now, you can go ahead and say, now's not the best time for that question, but I'm glad that you asked a question. Next comes, that contribution. So now they're starting to contribute, and they're getting a little bit of earned autonomy. But you're holding them accountable, right? They have to be invested with effort in order to start getting some autonomy. So everyone's not entitled to things in the fire environment. You're entitled to inclusion safety, right? You are valuable as a human being. And we know this job isn't for everyone, and that's okay. But once you start progressing into the contributor and even eventually challenger safety, right? That's the person where you're saying, actually, I disagree. And that's good. Mm-hmm. When you've got people disagreeing and saying, hey, have we thought about trying it this way? Now you're humming, and now you're doing good, and your culture is. Because if people feel safe enough to challenge you as a leader, and you feel safe enough to ask them questions about the game plan they're coming up to you with, you're in good shape. So again, I'm breezing through that, but culture is first. Now, once you have some culture in place where folks have trust built amongst themselves. And how do you build trust? Again, it's pretty simple. You reward vulnerability. When someone asks a question, you say, Kate, thanks for the question, right? When somebody tries their best, you're rewarding effort. And good outcomes are inevitable. You give people the glide path and the runway that they need in order to give their best effort. And then you celebrate effort, and you celebrate it universally. And we just did max weightlifting tests today for our crew as part of the sort of getting started for the season, right? We were just as hyped for the person that benched 250 as the person that benched 150, because both of them were giving their best effort.
And this is where there's, like, it's important, I think, in here to differentiate, because what you just described, that is a step away. This is a key component. If part of what you're doing is throwing this out there for people to either embrace and emulate or make their own or scoff and say that's ridiculous, I'll point out a few different things. If what you describe is as the era that you came up in as the see something, say something kind of era, and where that came from, I would describe the founding, the formulating piece of my real heavy operational time as more of the shut up and dig kind of era. And who knows where it is that shifted, but that or elements of the shut up and dig. Maybe it's a mix. But anyway, coming in, new crew members coming in, that is not a value. They wouldn't say, yeah, we're gonna reward asking questions and we're gonna reward effort no matter what the outcome is. No, that is not it. It was literally shut up. Learn by observing, and then become part of this high performance machine however you need to, but don't really talk or ask or just do, right? If you can't come in doing the pull-ups, you better get there quick, or you're not worth it to us. Right. And the same thing on what you talk about and how you joke, and you know what I mean, all of those kinds of things. It was a real kind of adapt or become us or leave, or be asked to leave, or be shown the door, right? And no guidance on how to become us, and not even a real definition of what us is. Right. You just sink or swim in the classic sense. And so this is a key distinction if what you're describing, and it sounds way harder to do what you're describing.
It's riskier. At least right now it feels riskier. It's so much easier to just be like, here's the number, hit it.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, I had this confliction, right? Because I'm hearing this, and I love that you brought up shut up and dig, because I'm going to get to that. I had this confliction because I grew up just outside of Prineville, Oregon, right? I respected and revered the send me, I'll go culture of wildland fire. And so I knew that it couldn't all be bad. But at the same time, I've got friends who are young women who are getting harassed in the wildland fire industrial complex perpetually, who are great firefighters and have no choice but to leave because they have to work so much harder to feel like they have to earn the right to be the true version of themselves at work. And the question really is, and you brought it up, right? You got to be one of us. Well, what does that mean? And when I started living my values and focusing and taking that humble accountability of, you know what, if I'm gonna ask this of people, I have got to live it too. The change that started to occur with me is I started to discover what that really meant, and it had nothing to do with my interests or politics or the music I listened to, and it had everything to do with the values that I held. And that's what being one of us means, is we're the types of people that are willing to experience discomfort beyond the scale that most people would even consider themselves capable of with, or even reasonable. We're willing to experience that discomfort in the name of self-sacrificial service to our fellow person, to each other, and to the public. We're willing to experience great discomfort in order to live our values with consistency. In fact, embracing discomfort, right? Thrive or embrace the suck. That's one of our values. That's one of our unspoken values. And that doesn't, what people look like or where they came from or their background, that wasn't determinant of having that value. People are out there with that value who've never been in the woods before. That's who we need out on the fire line. And it's because the fire environment is demanding it, and the public deserves it. And so but I'm not going to throw away everything that led us, because and the examples of those people from the past, just because they also were off base on some stuff, or that people who looked like them but weren't actually living those values perpetuated a toxic culture of shut up and dig.
Or that was just the best that they knew how to do, right? It wasn't malicious or anything like that.
I think what they were really saying was, and with that sort of, we hired you from the neck down, I interpret that as, you don't need to overanalyze. You don't need to over-intellectualize stuff. Follow your gut. Trust your gut. If you feel like that line needs to be a little bit cleaner, go clean it up, right? Mm-hmm. Go do the thing. Go do the little bit extra. Go that extra mile. And using your, what you have access to, which is your physical capability to do it. It was about effort. And different generations need to have that articulated to them differently. And they deserve that. And that's the responsibility of leadership. And so, we have to learn how to do that. But ultimately, exactly how you do it is it's like a recipe, right? And what I learned in sort of internalizing it from that mindset of, this is about empowering people to live the values that they're bringing to the table, exactly as they already are. They already have the values necessary. That's what we select for. That's the questions we ask in interviews or when we're pursuing people. That's what I'm listening for when I ask somebody, why do they want this job? I'm listening to what they value, what they hold valuable. And in other words, what do they get excitement out of? What are they willing to experience discomfort for? And if they answer those questions right, meaning, okay, this person is going to be successful and willing to experience discomfort in the fire environment for self-sacrificial reasons and the betterment of the team and overall team success, then I don't care how long it takes to teach them the skills necessary. And I really don't care how many pull-ups they can do. Now, if you have to do a required amount of pull-ups because you're a smoke jumper, well, that's a safety thing. That's a different deal. But it's more about, will this person give me their best effort all the time? And that doesn't always look like redlining, right? And so one of the things we do differently, and here's another sort of tidbit in rewarding effort, right, is I've got to give them the tools to and explain to them what that looks like. So some days we do a long, slow run, right? That's a pretty common, workout for a lot of fire crews. So if it's a long, slow run, well, then I want to see everyone's giving 100% effort to running at 65 to 75% of their max heart rate for 60 minutes straight and being able to speak in some full sentences. So don't get it twisted. It's not, I want to see people redlining all the time. No.
Yeah.
It's about approaching stuff with intention. Culture is the house, right? And in the house is a good kitchen. And in the kitchen is where you bake the cakes. Now, if you understand what values really are and what they mean, then that's like understanding the chemistry of cooking. And if you understand the chemistry of cooking, you don't need a line-by-line recipe. Someone can say, bake a cake. And you'll be able to utilize whatever ingredients you have, right? So it doesn't matter if you're using whole wheat flour or white flour. You can still bake a great cake if you've got your house in order.
Sure. And I think going back to a couple of points here about who is attracted to this job, right? Because they're going to come in lots of different packages. But that attraction, what is it that fire has that, the job of fire, what is it that we have that people want? And you talked about a whole handful of things. And that's the part where I don't know that what fire has changed, right? And because and the reason I talk about it is because there's all this like, kids these days, or, who's coming into the door is different and stuff like that. But what it is that we have to offer hasn't changed nearly as much. And the reason I bring it up is circling all the way back over to some of the things that we started about wanting to address, right, some of the things like divorce and addiction and suicide and self-harm and depression and some of those things. Right. There is a connection, I think, there about like who thrives in this job, right? Here's this job that is hard to do, and you're going to have to deal with discomfort. There is a group of people that come with that skill set, right?
Right,
And there's
definitely.
other professions that people are attracted to this kind of work, and sometimes it's because they got the skill set of dealing with hard things,
Yeah.
right? Also known as trauma. Um, in their
Yeah.
life, right? And so they come with this amazing skill set that we can put to work. But we
Yeah.
have to be careful because the other side of that, just and you talked about with the compartmentalization and some of those things, right? You're going to thrive a lot of times in this job because of that skill set, but you're still vulnerable to all the things that not only the job will continue to expose you to, and might actually accelerate in your personal life, but those other things are still there, right? And so
Right.
I just the thing that you're trying one of the things that you're trying to address here is that safety off of the fire line. It has this connection to what it
Yeah.
is, the type of people that thrive in this position, right?
Yeah.
And that's a constant. That's who comes, at least a group of people, not all of them, but that's partly who we're dealing with. And so, like you're saying with the cake, you got to be able to navigate that with whoever comes in, even when we know that is likely a thing that might show up at some point.
Right. They're correlated. What makes these people good at the job also
Yes.
makes them more susceptible to
Yes.
these negative outcomes in the psychological environment. And when our focus as a leadership culture, as a fire leadership culture, was just on the operational environment, it was a lot
Mm-hmm.
easier to ignore those things. But my focus has become, how do I get the best out of these people? Because I don't have this plethora of candidates from the logging town right down the road. And also, fire seasons are a lot more demanding, and we've got bigger crews and more firefighters out there. And so I left having, the negative outcomes of a more intense fire environment on front of mind. And then I was, oh my gosh, I got to put a fire crew together. And I mean, in the 80s, there wasn't a single fire on the Willamette National Forest. And now it's a big fire forest. And I've got this little hand crew on the west side in the Pacific Northwest. And we are getting things asked of us that hotshot crews from decades ago had once in career shifts. And that's like a
Yeah.
regular occurrence, right, for us. So I've got to reconcile all that. And again, like, I'm a student of fire. Got a master's in fire ecology. Like, I have read more about the fire environment in the US than many people. And I know what the potential is. And every year I go into the season going, we could be in one of those situations. And I got to make sure that my people are coming out okay. And so how I do that is I empower what they already have, what they're showing up with, right? That grittiness. First, we select for it, like you described, and it can come from all sorts of places. And now my duty is to mitigate the potential for risk. And I wasn't really thinking about that yet. I was mostly just thinking about, how do I get the best out of these people? And I had some awesome aha moments in that. First was, okay, aha moment. We as a society have a values debt, right? We have a couple of debts. Everyone is happy to talk about the financial debt. There's an environmental debt, right? We've done full suppression. We've got a bunch of fuels on the ground, but we also have a values debt. So we took that for granted. So we were getting these people in the door that already had these sort of gritty, grindy values, but people don't necessarily have that anymore. So we might need to teach some of that, but they have the potential for it, or that they're getting it from other inputs, like you said, different types of grind and struggle. I've got folks from New York on my crew that never saw the woods, but man, I tell you what, if they would have, they didn't need to.
Tough things come in all different shapes. It's not
exactly.
only on a farm, right, or the rural community. Like, yeah,
right.
Tough things are everywhere.
So we adjust that. So that aha moment was more, philosophical, but the more tactful aha moment for the crew that itself was, I don't need to have the answers in an increasingly dynamic fire environment. I mean, I'm at the hood of the truck, right, on IC4, emerging IC3 fires that are going big. And there's no IMT coming. And these people who I look up to a lot who've been doing this for 20 years are like, gosh, I've never seen anything like this. How many times have we heard that over the last few years? I've never seen anything like this. Not here. That's the new normal. Okay. So we're navigating an uncertain and an increasingly volatile fire environment with new types of people and different, and the generational changes are bigger than ever because of how quickly society is advancing technologically, and the day-to-day lives of people is, oh yeah, and we threw a pandemic in there. And so when I empowered people and I went through that sort of 4 tiers of psychological safety and I applied that on the crew, I didn't need the answers, because people with that safety of challenging, right, and innovating, they were coming to me with ideas that the classic fire school of thought wouldn't have thought of. And we were winning. We were keeping people safe. We were navigating this environment successfully. And because we were leaning into the values and living the values of duty, respect, and integrity in a way, in how we started the season, and we taught people about that. And so they knew that I valued them as people more than just their job, right? More than their position. I valued them as people. And guess the human brain is still the greatest problem solver on the planet, right? AI is coming, but it's not quite there yet. The human brain is incredible, and I've got access to 13 of them. And each one of them might have a piece of an idea that when we bring it together, we solve problems. I just need to be able to access all of that. And most of the time these days, our culture gets in the way of that. And that shut up and dig culture definitely got in the way of that. You want people's ideas. You want them to be inspired and innovating. But then what happened was, as this sort of trust culture took root, then these conversations started happening on the fire line. People started walking into my office, shut the door, right? And we take our hierarchy hats off. And we're talking to each other about the real life stuff that this job affects. And that's when it really hit me like, oh my gosh, I think I just stumbled my way into something actually really important that I probably need to figure out how to share more broadly. Because not only was this culture and this really recentering on our core values mindset, and as a leader, being the best example I can be, and being vulnerable with my mistakes and my failures, and asking for forgiveness from my people, and giving them the same benefit, right? Rewarding vulnerability whenever I could. I had stumbled my way into being able to mitigate the psychological risk, the unseen risks of the fire environment. To say it more plainly, I got to this point because of the relationships that developed through this intention with culture, that I could see, just like I can see a potential, bad physical environment outcome happening, whether it's a tree with a cat face in it or, a change in the wind. I can see when someone's they got too much and they're about to overflow. And you know what? Hey, and we can start to have those conversations and because we had to be vulnerable at work first with work related stuff. And what that led to was people being willing to be vulnerable with information about stuff outside of work with me. And I had to do some of that of my own. But I'm sure glad I did, because it's also helped me. I mean, I'm facing the same psychological environment as everybody else, right? And I haven't come through it unscathed. And that's the part that matters to me more than anything, because the people who do this job, Travis, I mean, as well as anybody else, are the most incredible people on the planet. And they're an example of core set of attributes that has led our society through its darkest times. And that's who's attracted to this line of work. And in the time that we're experiencing now of uncertainty and fear, regardless of where you stand politically, everybody is agreeing things are changing and changing fast, and we're not really sure what's coming next. Knowing that people like wildland firefighters are out there, that if we're reduced to a primal level of survival, like fire's knocking on your back door, there will be people who come and help. And that's what we represent. So putting some real effort into making sure those people are taken care of and not burn out is definitely worthwhile. And that's really where I sort of end the essay is, okay, so just FYI, if it's just sort of the surface level meaning of like, hey, here's how to get the best out of your Gen Zers, great. And it is, and it works that way. And I'm telling you, they will exceed your expectations. They are, young people these days are incredible in ways that you can't even begin to imagine. Their ability to problem solve and access innovative ways of doing things blows my mind all the time. But if you give it enough of a chance, it's also going to answer some of those questions that at least are the real ones that keep me up at night when you're worried about your people. And they're going to start coming to you with information about how they're doing as people, as long as you're willing to share it with them as well.
Or they're going to come to you and check on you about how you're doing.
Oh, yeah, man. No kidding. No kidding. Yeah.
But that's that investment in trust. And we know this from a bunch of different ways. We know it research-wise, we know it intellectually, and we know it culturally. I mean, these aren't entirely new things. I mean, we would say things like 20 sets of eyes are better than one, and what you're saying is, 20 brains are better than one, and and everybody's going to be functioning at different times. We also have said it takes a lot of different haircuts to build a good crew, which these are all things that are just saying, hey, diversity is good in its truest form, right? You want different inputs.
Well, that's something else too that I really, it's diversity. I'm going to use a fancy word, but I'm going to explain it also. So diversity as a value in the fire environment is about mission delivery, not détente. So détente's my fancy word. Everyone gets to learn a new word today. Essentially what it means is doing something to ease political tension. And I think so often considering diversity as a value gets kind of co-opted into that sphere. But on the fire line, it's about mission delivery. And diversity of your crew is a direct correlator with your ability to solve problems and navigate an uncertain environment.
Oh, absolutely. My favorite example of diversity on a crew is like, oh man, it's coming and we got to do something. Here's this piece of heavy equipment, but we don't have the keys to it. I happen to have somebody on my crew that through their life experience knows how to get that machine started without any keys. Right?
Yeah.
That's a great skill to have right then in that moment.
Yeah, man.
You know what I mean? And it like you said, it's skill based, but we also want it perspective based because we know, this is from the research side of things, problem solving is best achieved with many different perspectives and inputs, as long as each one of those has a voice, right? Has access to contribution to the solving, right? And operators of all sorts love to talk about how, ultimately my job as an operator is to solve problems. I get called when the bad day happens, and we come in and solve your problems. So if we're about solving problems, we need the best team to solve the problems, and of course we need lots of people looking and thinking about this problem from lots of different points of view and skill sets, and then having access to the decision, right? Or the input, I guess, on how it is that we're going to tackle the thing. And that's all, it all comes down to like, hey, have different types of brains on your crew.
Yeah. Well, people like to draw pictures of the leadership environment or, the fire environment, right? But leadership environment, right? And is it a triangle or is it an upside down triangle or a square, and I'm like, well, I don't know, but the fires don't burn in perfect shapes. And in my experience of the leadership environment is it's like an amoeba with all of and it's constantly changing. So, diversity of problem solving, yes, you're absolutely right. But that's one slice of the pie. But what I'm understanding is from a holistic perspective of valuing our people over everything else, right? And people, that's my core value is people are the most valuable thing, and every person is just as valuable as the next. I need positive commo in an environment like that that's an amoeba and constantly changing if I want to make sure that everybody is good. And so that diversity of relationships that people have, right? If we're all just like each other, well, then we're all going to sort of relate and be able to communicate easily on the same, in the same categories. And the areas where we don't easily have the conversation, sometimes the hard conversation, none of us are going to be able to have it with each other. But this interconnectedness, this diversity of personality type, of generation, of background, of gender, of whatever, any demographic or psychographic you can name, what that gives you access to, it's like putting a human repeater out all across this amoeba of a leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because the person who I'm in most close contact to is going to know which channel, in other words, how to communicate with me most effectively. And they're going to communicate with the next person over who they can most effectively communicate with, and on and on and on. And that's how I get the best possible situational awareness of the fire environment. And I'm just applying those things to the social environment as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just applying what we already know about high consequence problem solving in the fire environment to everything I'm doing these days. And I'm sitting here 5 or so years into, being responsible for managing a module and leadership on a small scale. And I'm sort of saying, hey, everyone, it kind of seems like we don't need to overcomplicate it if we just apply exactly what we're already good at on a broader scale. We know about diversity of You don't want to fight a fire with just a bunch of Type 6 engines, right? You want all sorts of stuff.
Exactly. And I'm all about hey man, let's use the strengths. So is it working? Describe like what's the vibe on the crew?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's first of all, it's everyone has positive comms, right? I've got pretty good essay. The vibe's good. Now, it'd be best to ask them, but people celebrate each other, man, and that's really what one of the things, because again, like this whole this style, I had to, I was raised in a culture that barked at people when you weren't performing optimally. And that motivation style worked for me. But I had to trust enough I knew it didn't work for everybody because I'd heard enough horror stories, and mostly because the end state was with that sort of style, you got a bunch of people who were just like me. But I wanted to get people who weren't just like me, again, for the utility of diversity for mission delivery. And so I had to be patient with it and take a risk because it was outside of the classic leadership style I had been raised in. But if we look at what we're doing here as a marathon, not a sprint, what I found was, the vibe in the chow hall at the end of the season, right? The way that the folks were still hanging out with each other and laughing and joking around. They were putting out more and better line at the end of October, and it was just as good as they were doing at the beginning of the year. And what I had seen was, in that old style of barking at each other and questioning each other's commitment, if you weren't giving your full effort, instead of asking, hey, what's up? You good? What do you got going on outside of work, et cetera, or barking at somebody when they fell out of the hike instead of just walking alongside them and saying, hey, you got this. Like, you're keep, 1 foot in front of the other, right? It's about consistency over time. That old style, we would burn out. And so we'd crush it, man. We'd kill it in July, but everyone knows what Snaptember is. Well, my crew doesn't have Snaptember.
Yeah.
And it's because I've learned, and I've got essay on everybody, whether I relate to them easily or not, through that chain of communication and the willingness of each other to communicate with each other and be vulnerable with the stuff you need to be vulnerable with the people you trust. And there are people on my crew who don't come straight to me. And that's just fine. They know they don't have to. But there are people on my crew who I come to with my most vulnerable stuff, right? And on and on and on. And that goes back and forth. And so I have essay on when I've got some people on the crew who need a little break, or who really are like chomping at the bit for a trainee assignment, or who haven't gotten to cut a big tree in a long time. And we make sure that we facilitate that stuff. So the vibe is good. And it comes from, again, I'm going to say it again, right? We celebrate effort. It's not about outcome.
Yeah.
We model what we do, right? We model our leadership. You are expected to be vulnerable about, when you're not consistent, meaning, we don't expect you to be perfect, but your consistent behavior should be a model. And we coach. We are clear with what we tolerate and what we don't. And single points of failure are learned from, right? But that's not how people are appraised. People are appraised, their performance is appraised based on consistent behavior.
Yeah. It's so funny because it so models, again, I'll go back to it, but so many people's experience with parenting, and especially parenting in the modern era, or if you're trying to parent, um, having, going like looking back and going, oh man, a lot of the parenting style of the past is just straight up abusive, right? and,
Yeah.
and I don't actually want to replicate that, but I don't really know how. So let me learn how to do it, and some of it's going to feel weird to do. But you're so invested in the outcome that you're willing to learn a different way, because you once you see it, you go, oh man, that's kind of twisted, right? When you think about some of the things that were just okay, and you look back at fire culture, and you're just like, oh yeah, like that kind of course we're going to end up with like people fighting in the back of the buggy, at 900 hours.
Yeah, and that's why I use that term, like humble accountability. It's because that's where it starts. It's rooting yourself in that, because that's what allows you to uh, take the time necessary, and most importantly, check your ego enough to have your walk reflect the talk that you're talking. And otherwise you're being coercive and manipulative. Do as I say, not as I do. That's coercion.
Yeah.
That's manipulation based on position power. And we know that most communication is nonverbal, right? And leadership is really about telling a story to your people and making them feel included, that the story you're all participating in together. And so when you talk about parenting, that's the family story, right? That's every human being's first hero's journey, is their role in the family and contributing to the family. And that's a good thing, because we've been telling stories. I mean, we are still a Paleolithic species, no matter what technology does, right? So we respond to stuff. I mean, I'm also kind of a science-based, perspective type of person. And so I appreciate it when things are confirmed in the objective reality of our existence, in addition to the philosophical realm. And that's where I think sort of culture and values can be a little squishy, and people can kind of just scoff at it. And I get it, right? Because it is a little philosophical, but let's anchor it in the physical world then. And our species has, responds well to stories. And what stories really do is they inform us on what our hierarchy of values should be, right? So literally, what should be held in higher value over others. Now, we have a firefighter story, and our hierarchy of values is duty, respect, and integrity. And great leaders unite others with story. And in doing so, you can transfer your hierarchy of values to others. And so here's another thing that we do on the crew. We have handy dandy, we call them handy, but crew organizers, right? I don't know, a lot of people have them, but it's got radio frequencies and programming instructions and our flight weights and chore lists and all sorts of just good intel to have. But in the back page, we have an exercise that we, in fact, will be going through this week on the crew. And first is our organizational values. So really, one of the big takeaways from this is, at the very least, start with this. Identify what the organizational values are that you're all agreeing to be a part of. Use them as a hypothesis for expected behavior. And then give everyone an opportunity to share their personal values, because that's the diversity, right? That's how you get this spectrum of capacity, is we're all aligned on our organizational values of duty, respect, and integrity. And so, I use if-then statements. So I'll just read to you from the back of our crew organizer here, our shared values. By choosing to be a member of Crew 31, you are agreeing to value duty, respect, and integrity. If we value duty, then we choose to sacrifice individual comfort or preference for the good of the team. Seek and embrace challenge. Reward vulnerability with gratitude. If we value respect, then we treat others like we would want to be treated, as if we were them, right? Put yourself in their shoes. Build trust through honesty and authenticity. If we value integrity, then we give our best effort to the task at hand. Acknowledge, forgive, and learn from mistakes in ourselves and others. And then on the next page, I have my personal values. And in my personal values, you've got a bracket where you can write in, and then you can sort of go then I. And so, for me, it's discipline, consistency, and curiosity, right? But essentially what we're doing here is we're giving people an opportunity to bring the stuff that they hold in high value within themselves and share it with the group. But we're also coming to an agreement on what is our hierarchy of values and what does that look like, so that we can estimate each other's consistent behavior with high success rates. And in doing so, that's how you fight fire in a herd of elephants. You've got to estimate what your crew members are doing. You're not going to be able to control and direct their actions. And we're not just in a herd of elephants in the fire environment. We're also in a herd of elephants in the real world.
Yeah.
And so it's our job to take all that into a play. And we can't possibly, it would be arrogant of us to think we could predict all the potential outcomes. So instead, it's make people feel included in the story that you're telling and deliver to them the hierarchy of values, because reality is what's left when facts sort of filter through what you hold valuable. Our brains are impressive more so for what they don't let us see than what they do, right? If we were taking in all the information all the time, we'd be totally overwhelmed. And we're all pretty good at that, right? In the fire environment, we know how to sort of determine which information is helpful and what isn't, and we sort of set that stuff aside, the stuff that isn't helpful at the time. And so having everybody on the same page with that values agreement gets us a good head start. And then we encourage them to explore and implement their own values. It's really about having expectations, match up with your reality. That's when satisfaction is its highest. And we can actually influence that. We're not just, again, back to the sort of thermostat versus thermometer thing. As a leader with the proper culture in place, so people trust you, that's the first step, is you've got to make sure people trust you, which means you've got to live your example. When all that's kind of humming along, and it doesn't have to be perfect, it's about what you do consistently. The stuff that I used to worry about and that I was trying to figure out and find solutions for because it was the stuff that scared me the most isn't a problem anymore. The answers sort of just materialize, and it's rarely from within my own mind. It's because of the crew dynamic itself.
Yeah, the safety net is the trust, right? That's how you craft that net, is all those different channels that you talked about, the human repeater being able to select and connect, and it weaves this, this net that's going to be able to catch someone, when life is happening, right? Rather than a whole bunch of individuals that are going to fall down because they're trying to do it on their own, or they've been taught that, or they've been shown that no, you are on your own, right? But you've crafted a different belief, and we know that these are the things that identify and catch us is community, and a community that it involves trust and vulnerability, right? I mean, that's huge.
And it's not soft, and it's not about being nice.
Yeah. And it just happens because of these other things that you're building. And I guess that kind of gets to that recipe. It's like, it's a curious thing. If that's what you're shooting for, you're gonna have to go to this thing that might feel counterintuitive or feel like a circuitous route, right, in terms of what you build, to get all the way back around to that safety net that's going to catch people. And it's not like, divorce is never going to happen, but how somebody deals with it, or or addiction isn't ever going to happen, but when the signal shows up, right. And how it is that people are going to even talk about it or navigate it, that's the thing that's different. And getting there it's not going to be as direct as you might think. Yes.
Yeah. If we are anything, we are in the era of the indirect approach, to say the least. And boy, that's a great analogy. It feels it feels counterintuitive at first. Like, man, we just, back in the day, we used to just, and it's like, okay, but we can't. It's not that we're soft. It's that it's literally unsafe. It's a suicide mission to just go like we used to do, there won't be any more firefighters and the towns will burn down anyway. So if we're living our values of duty, respect, and integrity, then we need to be willing to do the hard right of taking the indirect approach. And so where that feels the weirdest is right at the beginning, when you feel like maybe I could just take the direct approach. And but man, once you're augured in on, and you're burning that line and it's working and the town's safe and it's an epic burn, you're like, heck yeah. Okay, so where does that apply to, the crew itself? Okay, well, first it's who you're hiring. And second, it's the person shows up and they're not as in quite as good a shape as, maybe they could have been or whatever, right? Somebody has some work to do, just like we all did as firefighters. The direct approach is to, in the way we used to do it, is to make them feel bad, bark at them, and sort of sink or swim, right? And the indirect approach is, you know what? They're there for a reason, and they have potential to contribute and be a part of that net, that catcher's mitt, right? What's a good burn, Travis? It's a catcher's mitt. So this person has potential to be a part of that catcher's mitt. And you know what? At the very least, I'm going to show some vulnerability to the rest of the crew by saying, you know what? I see this person is underperforming, and I value them as a person more than their performance. And so I'm going to investigate why that is and actually try and come alongside them and help them attain the best version of themselves from wherever they're at right now. Because that's all we have access to is what's right now and how we can influence the future with it. And if anything, even if it doesn't work out for that person, right? And they decide that this isn't the job for them. Okay, hey, great. Then another opportunity for coaching and modeling a little bit is as you're shepherding them into the next phase, your whole crew's watching, they're paying attention, right? Now, I've never had that happen. And so all I've had happen is those people end up coming along pretty quickly, eventually, and then they end up exceeding whatever that arbitrary standard number I would have set otherwise would have been, because they're empowered and excited and their effort is being celebrated. And as they continue to apply effort, there's no finish line.
And you've got their unique contribution, whatever it is, right? Right. Now that the team has that.
Right. Exactly. And so it's kind of, it's being willing to take the risk and apply that mindset to our fire community as a whole. And one of the things that's been so cool about this time that we're in is we're seeing it occur on a bigger scale in people who are being willing to sort of bring these topics out into the open. I mean, whether you've got like hotshot wellness, you've got, the stuff the Firefighter Foundation is doing, Grassroots is doing a bunch of stuff. Like, there are advocates out there. Our cohort of people is being, their value is being recognized. And I think I'm hopeful that it's going to continue to take off in the direction that it's been heading. Because like I said, I mean, these people represent the value of competitive selflessness at its core. I can't remember the author's name, but there's a guy who wrote a Backbone series spot a little while ago, and that was what he pointed out was competitive selflessness. And I was like, oh yes, that is exactly our core value, and it's also the American core value. In its purest form, we are competitively pursuing our potential for contribution to something bigger than ourselves with a vigor. If that doesn't describe wildland firefighters, I don't know what does.
Right on. Well, that I think there's a lot to chew on there, and so maybe we can wind this down with a fairly standard approach. I think, at least I enjoy it, is just tell us a funny fire story that has a lesson in it.
Well, I think I think one of my favorites, and sort of on that note of competitive selflessness, I was the campfire in 2018 was a formative experience for me, and I think a lot of the people who were on it, at least, especially in that first 48, 72 hours. And what my story was of the campfire is, they had basically the most of the temporary seasonal folks had been laid off, and so long story short, within an hour or two of that fire starting, a handful of permanent employees from 4 different hotshot crews, Tahoe, Mendocino, Truckee, Elk Mountain, all ended up forming a super crew and burning and doing whatever we could. And it was one of the gnarlier roles I've ever experienced, to say the least. And so multiple shifts in of essentially you come on in the morning after bedding down for a little while to get some sleep. You figure out where you need to implement and burn next. You're prepping, and then you're resetting and you're burning, and then sleeping a little bit more, and then on to the next one. It was one of those situations where you were going to make up your 2-to-1 on the back end, and it was necessary. We needed to. So it's 3 or 4 in the morning, and we had tied in a burn, and it had gone well. And hey, kudos, but man, we are tapped out, and we're a few miles in on some moon dust, Northern California dozer line. Like if you haven't experienced, it's the kind of place where you find out what you're made of. And we had to walk back out to the buggies. I don't, whatever the reason was. It wasn't one of those nice burns where you sort of tie it in and there's a truck there waiting for you to drive you to wherever you need to go. We were walking, and there was a full 5-gallon jerry of slash fuel. And we needed to pack everything out. And I definitely didn't want to pack that thing out, right? But I watched 2 hotshots literally wrestle in the dozer line for who got the privilege of carrying that thing out, so that somebody else didn't have to. And if that doesn't define competitive selflessness, I don't know what does. And so it's that mindset of if we were going to be the best crew we could be tomorrow, at that given moment, there were some individuals who had more beans to give, and there were some individuals like me who were absolutely tapped out. And instead of, I don't know, doing some sort of coin flip or whatever to figure out, what's the fairest way to get this job done, those guys took into account the fact that they had more to give, and that they wanted to, that was what they were there to do, was to give whatever they had. And so much so that it was the privilege of getting to give a little bit more. That's the kind of mindset that makes us who we are. And that's the kind of mindset that will, that if we can access that in a diverse way, meaning in a spectrum of people, so that we can address and mitigate the risks both on and off the fire line, applying that mindset to our crew and how we care for each other when we're at home, just like we do when we're out on the fire line. That's how we navigate this situation we found ourselves in, for the benefit of each other and for the benefit of the public.
Yeah, absolutely. That's classic.
It was hilarious too. And they certainly wanted to. It wasn't like it was forced. But yeah, I mean, the bottom line is, however it works for you, right? Figure out what the recipe is. But
yeah,
but identify what your values are. Take pride in the ones that make us as a community, the shared ones we have, right? Duty, respect, and integrity. Be honest with yourself and humble about whether or not you're living them in your own life. We've seen enough examples to know if this is necessary, and if this is worth giving a try. This serious contemplation and implementation of intentional culture and practicing of our values. We don't have to wait for bureaucrats or managers to tell us how to do it, or that we should do it. We get to take ownership of this. And if anything, man, with all the changes that are on the horizon for the fire service in general, with new pay tables, with all this type of stuff that's happening, I think our biggest duty right now is to ensure that we are prepping the ground and priming the environment for that stuff, for that burn to go well, because that's what the public deserves. And so I think that, the time is now to be intentional with things like culture. And part of that is, let's take a critical look at our leadership culture in fire and in the wildland fire community, and be honest with ourselves about, is it serving us as well as it can? And if not, what does a new recipe look like from wherever you're at within your sphere of influence?
Yeah, and which involves doing it, right? Like it's that
Right.
it's easy to throw rocks. And it's good to point out, leadership failures or wherever they exist. But it also starts with, like, do it, handle it.
Yeah.
Go be what it is you think right looks like yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Whether or not you think this is what's going on right now is the best thing that's ever happened or the worst thing that's ever happened, living our shared values of duty, respect, and integrity look exactly the same. Doing the best you possibly can for your people in the fire environment, serving them. Your crew are the customers, not the other way around.
Right on. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Ben, and we'll look for the comments and the feedback, and I'm excited, and I really appreciate you taking the time to lend your voice and share your lessons. That's ultimately what we're all about. So thanks a bunch, man.
Thank you, Travis. I don't claim to have the answers, man, but at least I could do is be an example of what vulnerability looks like. And if it's rewarded with people's attention, then fantastic, good or bad. I hope it inspires some folks to renew their engagement with intention.
Right on. Thanks. All right, there it is. Huge thank you to Ben for coming on, being vulnerable, putting himself out there, all those things. And you all know the drill. The ball is in your court, right? Now it's up to you. Take some of these things to your sphere of influence. Maybe you don't run the crew, but maybe you can bring some of these ideas or this episode specifically to someone who is receptive to it. Maybe you just need to go and look at some of the resources that Ben mentioned using when they were intentionally designing the culture of their crew. Maybe you just need to go and read the blog post that he references. It's on our blog site, wildfirelessons.blog. It's called Humble Accountability. What a gift, and some really positive lessons, really good stuff. And we're so grateful for Ben and all of the folks that help him implement this style of leadership and this approach. All right, thanks to you all out there for listening. Be sure to put some effort into implementing some of these things, and take care. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you for listening to the Wildfire Lessons podcast. Don't forget to head on over to lessons.wildfire.gov to get all the latest information from the Wildland Fire Lessons Learn Center. You can subscribe to our email list and follow us on social media. Music is provided by second-generation smoke jumper Steve Baker, who always likes to keep one foot in the black. Thanks, Steve. Remember, we honor through learning.